The war room fell silent when Commander Vexic slammed his secondary appendage against the hollow table. 36 species representatives watched the tactical display flicker and resettle, showing terrain that would soon become a graveyard. Unacceptable. The Kralix officer growled, his throat sac inflating with agitation. The training simulation projects 43% casualty rates. 43%. We might as well throw our recruits into a fusion reactor. Captain Nalith of the Torvine delegation nodded her crested head in grim agreement. My analysts confirmed these projections. The contested reach operation requires night maneuvers through hostile territory. Without proper illumination arrays, we're sending soldiers to slaughter. Around the chamber, military leaders from across the coalition murmured their assent. The holographic battlefield rotated slowly, 20 kilometers of broken canyon, vertical cliff faces, and dense mineral deposits that scattered sensor readings into meaningless static. Intelligence reported enemy forces dug deep into those formations, waiting. At the far end of the table, partially obscured by the broader frames of Urgoth commanders, sat Lieutenant Colonel Mira Koskinen. She hadn't spoken since the briefing began 90 minutes ago. The human representative simply watched, her dark eyes tracking each presentation, each grim statistic, each increasingly desperate proposal for additional equipment that would take months to manufacture and deploy. Perhaps we postpone, suggested Admiral Threck, his massive form shifting uncomfortably. The Urgoth rarely admitted defeat, but even their renowned stubbornness had limits. Reassess. Attack during solar peak when visibility. By then, the enemy will have fortified 3 additional sectors. Vexic's voice carried the exhaustion of someone who'd fought this argument in 100 meetings. We strike in 9 cycles, or we don't strike at all. The strategic window closes. Then we require better solutions than marching into darkness, Nalith said flatly. Colonel Koskinen cleared her throat. The sound somehow cut through the chamber despite its softness. Conversations died. Heads turned. The human officer stood, her modest height dwarfed by nearly every other being present. She wore standard coalition fatigues, unadorned except for rank insignia and a small patch depicting a blue world wrapped in white clouds. Permission to speak, Commander. Vexic gestured acknowledgement, relief flickering across his features. The humans were new to the coalition, barely 3 standard cycles since first contact, but their military advisors had already earned grudging respect. Perhaps they saw something others missed. Granted, Colonel. Please tell me your species has some miracle technology that renders nocturnal combat obsolete. Mira smiled. Not the polite diplomatic expression coalition officers had learned to expect from humans, but something sharper. Almost predatory. No miracle, Commander. Just a training request. The silence that followed carried a different quality. Confusion. Mostly. Training? Nalith's crest flattened in puzzlement. Colonel, we've reviewed the operation parameters extensively. More drills won't alter the fundamental problems. Visibility drops to near 0. Sensors fail. Communication breaks down. Friendly fire incidents increase exponentially. The mathematics are brutal. I understand. Mira touched the hollow table, bringing up a new file. I'm requesting permission to run a joint night exercise. Human forces alongside coalition units. No simulation. Actual field conditions in a controlled environment. 3 cycles from now. Vexic studied her carefully. Humans were difficult to read. Their facial structures didn't broadcast emotion like proper species. But something in the set of her shoulders suggested certainty. You believe this will help? I believe it will change the conversation, Commander. At what cost? We cannot afford casualties in training exercises, Colonel. Our forces are stretched thin. No casualties, Mira said simply. None expected, none tolerated. Standard safety protocols, but I need permission to conduct the exercise after dark. Full darkness. No artificial illumination beyond what individual soldiers carry. The chamber erupted. Half a dozen officers spoke simultaneously, their translators creating a cacophony of protest and disbelief. Admiral Throke's booming voice finally cut through. Colonel Koskinen, you describe precisely the conditions we're trying to avoid. You wish to train our forces in an environment proven lethal? With respect, Admiral, you're trying to avoid conditions that exist whether we like them or not. The enemy chose that battlefield. The planetary rotation doesn't care about our preferences. We can adapt, or we can surrender the initiative. Adapt how? Nalith demanded. Our visual spectrum requires adequate photon density. Urgoth can perceive slightly further into infrared, but even they cannot navigate complex terrain in total darkness. Kralik's echolocation helps, but not enough for combat precision. You're describing an impossible scenario. Mira's smile hadn't faded. Impossible for Coalition standard doctrine. Yes, but Command expected casualties. I'm asking for permission to train at night, that's all. Vexic felt his throat sac deflate slowly. The human's calm certainty was either confidence or insanity, and he'd learned those often looked identical from the outside. Explain your reasoning, Colonel. Why do you believe humans can succeed where others cannot? Because humans evolved as pursuit predators on a world with significant axial tilt. Commander, we hunted in low-light conditions for millions of years. Our eyes adapted. Our tactics evolved. Darkness isn't an obstacle to us, it's just different terrain. Your species can see in total darkness? Nalith's skepticism was palpable. Not total, we need some ambient light, but far, far less than you require. Our visual range extends further into infrared than most Coalition species. We can detect motion in conditions you'd consider pitch black, and more importantly, we trained for it. Human military doctrine includes extensive night operations. We don't avoid darkness, we use it. The holographic battlefield rotated again, its broken terrain mocking them all. This exercise, Vexic said slowly. What exactly do you propose? Send your best units. 200 soldiers, mixed species, standard Coalition composition. Give them their orders, their equipment, their standard procedures. My people will bring a single platoon, 40 humans. We'll run parallel operations through identical terrain. No handicaps, no special equipment, just comparative performance. And when your people stumble off cliffs in the dark, when they fire on each other because they can't identify targets. Throck's question carried genuine concern rather than mockery. Then you'll have data suggesting the night operation is inadvisable. But if my people succeed, Mira let the sentence hang. If they succeed, you'll have demonstrated that one species can operate in conditions others cannot. Vexic finished. Which doesn't solve our problem. We're planning a Coalition offensive, not a human solo mission. No, Commander. If we succeed, we demonstrate that humans can train others, that we can share techniques, equipment modifications, tactical approaches, that what seems impossible becomes merely difficult with proper preparation. The war room fell silent again. Officers exchanged glances, their various body languages broadcasting doubt and curiosity in equal measure. 3 cycles, Vexic finally said. You'll have your exercise. Select a suitable location, submit safety protocols, coordinate with Coalition Training Command. But Colonel, if this fails, if soldiers are injured because of overconfidence in your species' particular advantages, the consequences will be severe. Understood, Commander. Mira's salute was crisp, efficient. We won't fail. Training Sector Gamma 7 sprawled across 30 square kilometers of volcanic badlands. The Coalition had claimed this moon specifically for military exercises, harsh terrain, minimal atmosphere, temperature extremes that tested equipment and endurance alike, perfect for preparing soldiers for the universe's countless hellholes. Sergeant Rock of the Torvian 3rd Battalion stood at the staging area's edge, watching the human platoon conduct final equipment checks. His enhanced vision, superior to most species in the Coalition, could still barely distinguish individual humans as dusk faded to darkness. They moved with practiced efficiency, but nothing about their preparation seemed remarkable. Standard rifles, standard armor, standard loadouts. They're either brilliant or suicidal, Lieutenant Cass muttered beside him. The young Kralik's officer's nervousness showed in the rhythmic clicking of her mandibles. Probably suicidal. Command approved the exercise, Rock reminded her. That means someone believes in their capability. Command is desperate. We're 9 cycles from an operation that will define the war's next phase, and we have no workable strategy. Of course they'd entertain any proposal, no matter how absurd. Ross couldn't entirely disagree. He'd reviewed the casualty projections himself, had watched simulation after simulation end in disaster. The contested reach was a strategic nightmare. Yet here they stood, preparing to march into darkness because a human officer smiled confidently and made impossible claims. The common channel crackled. All units, this is exercise control. Solar phase concludes in 15 minutes. Coalition forces will begin their objective at that time. Human forces will commence 30 minutes later, allowing separation and independent operation. Remember, this is training. Safety protocols remain paramount. If you cannot safely complete your objective, abort and return to base. No heroics, reasonable words, sensible precautions. But the mission parameters themselves defied sense. Both units, coalition and human, would navigate 10 kilometers of canyon terrain in complete darkness. They'd identify and neutralize mock enemy positions, navigate 3 vertical climbing sections, cross 4 potential ambush zones, and establish a forward observation post on the ridge overlooking the primary valley. Standard Special Operations Profile. Standard except for the complete absence of light. The coalition force numbered 200. Drawn from 8 different species, all elite units. The human platoon comprised exactly 40 soldiers. The imbalance seemed deliberate, almost insulting. Full darkness fell like a hammer. Rock activated his helmet's illumination system, a standard issue array providing enough light to navigate safely. Around him, 200 lights flickered to life, turning the staging area into a constellation of moving stars. The effect was dramatic, almost beautiful. It also announced their position to anyone watching from kilometers away. Coalition forces, you are cleared to begin. Exercise control announced. Timer starts now. Captain Yuvan, the Urgoth commanding the coalition group, gave the order. 200 soldiers moved out in standard formation, their lights bobbing through darkness like bioluminescent creatures in deep water. Rayok watched them go, then turned his attention to the human staging area. The platoon had finished their preparations. Colonel Koskinen stood before them, speaking words too distant for his hearing to catch. Then, as one, the humans moved toward the canyon's mouth. They moved without lights. Replek's breath caught. 40 soldiers advanced into absolute darkness with nothing but starlight, and this moon's meager starlight barely registered to his enhanced eyes. Within seconds, he lost sight of them completely. The humans simply vanished, swallowed by shadow. Impossible, Kiss whispered, but exercise control's tracker showed 40 signals progressing into the canyon's depths, maintaining formation, advancing at standard march pace. They moved like they could see. Private First Class Jamal Okafor loved the night. Always had, even as a kid in Lagos when the city's light pollution made true darkness impossible. Here, on this barren moon, with atmosphere thin enough to see stars like diamond chips scattered across black velvet, the night felt honest, real. He checked his optics display, the passive night vision system painting the world in shades of green and gray. Enough ambient infrared radiation bounced around this volcanic landscape that everything appeared in decent detail. Not daylight clarity, but plenty for navigation. Echo Team. Status check. Lieutenant Voss's voice whispered through the comm. Echo 2. Good position. Echo 3. Advancing on your right. Echo 4. Covering. Jamal clicked his confirmation. Echo 5. Good to go. The platoon flowed through the canyon in textbook formation. Point team scouting, main body following, rear guard watching their 6. They'd rehearsed this 1,000 times. Darkness changed nothing. Well, almost nothing. Moving through terrain this broken required constant attention. But humans had been running through forests in the dark since before they invented fire. Instinct kicked in. Step here, not there. Watch the shadow that might be a drop-off. Listen for falling stones. Trust your senses. The first checkpoint lay 3 kilometers in, a narrow section where canyon walls pressed close. Perfect ambush territory. Coalition forces would have to bunch up, lights concentrated perfect targets. The humans approached it differently. Lieutenant Voss raised a closed fist. The platoon froze. 40 soldiers becoming statues in the darkness. Jamal strained his hearing, filtering out his own breathing, his heartbeat, the faint whisper of recycled air through his helmet. There ahead, the slight electronic hum of mock enemy sensors. Vance pointed. 2 fingers. Flanking team. Then a circular motion, loop around. 4 soldiers detached from the main group. melting into shadows that were barely distinct from the surrounding darkness. Jamal couldn't track them once they moved beyond his sight line, but he trusted their skill. Coalition doctrine would push straight through, accepting casualties to maintain momentum. Human doctrine exploited every advantage, including patience. 5 minutes passed. Then Voss's comm clicked twice. Clear. The platoon advanced through the checkpoint without triggering a single sensor. Behind them, electronic warfare specialists placed signal jammers that would confuse coalition forces following the same route hours later. Exercise control. This is Koskinen, the colonel's voice murmured over the command channel. Human forces have cleared checkpoint Alpha. No contact, no alerts. Proceeding to objective. A pause, then confirmed, Colonel. Coalition forces encountered difficulties at that location. They're regrouping. Jamal allowed himself a small smile. Difficulties. That was diplomatic language for lit themselves up like Christmas trees and got shredded by automated defenses. The canyon opened into a broader valley section. Here the vertical climbing began. 80-meter cliff faces, rough volcanic rock, multiple routes to the top. Coalition forces would need to establish anchors, run safety lines, coordinate across multiple teams. Slow, methodical, noisy, a human platoon split into 4-person teams and simply climbed. Jamal's fingers found holds that were barely visible divots in the rock face. His boots braced against protrusions he detected more by feel than sight. Above him, Sergeant Hollis climbed with the casual confidence of someone who'd scaled mountains on 3 different worlds. Below, Corporal Yu provided backup, ready to catch if Jamal slipped. He wouldn't slip. This was what humans did. They climbed trees to escape predators, climbed cliffs to find new hunting grounds, climbed mountains because they were there, hand over hand, foot by foot, breathing controlled, muscles burning pleasantly. 80 meters took 12 minutes. Jamal hauled himself over the ridge's lip and immediately moved to covering position, weapon ready, scanning for threats. The rest of Echo Team joined him within 90 seconds. Across the ridge, other teams established their own positions, creating an interlocking field of observation. All teams report, Voss ordered. Every squad checked in. 40 soldiers, now occupying high ground, having navigated terrain that coalition forces would take 2 hours to cross. 0 casualties. 0 injuries. 0 compromises. Exercise controls channel remained ominously silent. Colonel Koskinen materialized beside Jamal's position, her approach soundless. He nearly jumped. You didn't sneak up on soldiers even in training. But the colonel had always moved like smoke. Comfortable, Okafor. Yes, ma'am. Nice view. It was. From this vantage you could see the coalition forces' lights progressing through the valley below, a glowing serpent of illumination that marked their position for any enemy within visual range. They'd adapted their tactics somewhat. Smaller light clusters, attempts at dispersion, but the fundamental problem remained. They needed those lights and those lights betrayed them. They're trying, Koskinen said quietly, reading his thoughts. Every one of those soldiers is skilled, experienced, professional. This isn't about competence. No, ma'am. It's about evolution. Exactly. She activated her command tablet, recording video of the scene below. War is terrible. But the universe doesn't care about fair fights. It doesn't balance capabilities or give everyone equal chances. Some species breathe methane. Some navigate by magnetic fields. Some see polarized light. And some, like us, hunt in the dark. Below, the coalition force reached the cliff face. Lights concentrated as they prepared climbing operations. Even from this distance, Jamal could hear the clatter of equipment, the shouted coordination, the organized chaos of moving that many bodies through a bottleneck. You think they'll accept what this exercise proves? He asked. Koskinen was silent for a long moment. Some will. Others will rationalize, claim special circumstances, argue that battlefield conditions differ. But the smart ones, the ones who actually want to win this war, they'll listen. They'll learn, and if they don't, then we'll fight in the dark alone. Her smile was invisible in the darkness, but Jamal heard it in her voice. Wouldn't be the first time humans did what others thought impossible. The platoon maintained position, watching coalition forces struggle through operations the humans had completed with casual efficiency. By the time both groups established their forward observation posts, the time differential was devastating. Coalition forces, 4 hours, 16 minutes. Human forces, 1 hour, 42 minutes. Casualty comparison even more stark. Coalition recorded 12 injuries, 3 severe enough to require evacuation. Human forces, 0. Exercise Control's final transmission carried a quality that Jamal had learned to recognize across a dozen species. Shock. All units, return to base for debrief. Exercise concluded. The after-action review room could have doubled as a funeral parlor. 200 coalition soldiers sat in rigid silence, their various biological expressions unified in displaying variations of humiliation and disbelief. Performance metrics displayed on the wall told a story brutal in its simplicity. Humans had completed the mission in 40% of the time with 0 casualties, while coalition forces stumbled through darkness like newborns. Commander Vaxic stood at the podium, his throat sac carefully neutral. This exercise reveals significant tactical gaps in our night operation capabilities. I will not sugarcoat results. By any objective measure, human performance exceeded coalition performance dramatically. Captain Yorvin, the Urgoth, who'd commanded coalition forces, rose to his feet. His massive frame trembled with emotion that might have been rage or shame. Commander, with respect, this exercise proved nothing except that one species possesses advantageous biology. Should we also test underwater combat against Kellan, who breathe aquatic environments, or vacuum operations against Krit, who require no atmosphere? This demonstrates evolutionary lottery, not tactical superiority. Sergeant Rock watched Colonel Koskinen's reaction carefully. The human officer sat in the front row, her expression calm, almost sympathetic. She didn't interrupt Yuvan's outburst, didn't rush to defend her species' performance. She simply waited. Captain Yuvan raises valid concerns. Vaxic acknowledged. Colonel Koskinen, please address them. Mira stood, and despite her smaller stature, somehow commanded the room's attention. Captain Yuvan is absolutely correct. Humans possess biological advantages for night operations that most coalition species lack. We see further into infrared. Our pupils dilate more effectively. Our brains process low-light information more efficiently. This is evolutionary reality, not earned superiority. The admission surprised Rock. He'd expected defensive posturing, pride, maybe subtle condescension. Instead, the human acknowledged her species' advantages with matter-of-fact honesty. However, Mira continued, biology explains perhaps 30% of the performance differential. The remaining 70% comes from training, doctrine, and psychological preparation. That portion is teachable. Impossible, Lieutenant Cussis said, her mandibles clicking rapid disagreement. You cannot teach Torvandis to see infrared they cannot perceive. You cannot train Kralik's echolocation to penetrate mineral-dense terrain. Biology is destiny. Biology is foundation, Mira corrected gently. What you build on that foundation depends on training. Let me demonstrate. She activated the holo display, bringing up mission footage. The coalition force appeared first, their helmet lights creating clear visibility in a sphere around each soldier. Rakolexdize, the formation's standard doctrine for limited visibility operations. Stay close. Maintain light overlap. Proceed cautiously. What you're seeing is sensible tactics, designed to compensate for reduced visibility. The problem is that light itself becomes the vulnerability. You illuminate yourself to enemies who don't need to return the favor. Every photon you emit marks your position, your numbers, your intentions. The footage shifted to human forces, or rather where human forces should have been. The night vision recording showed ghostly figures moving through darkness, barely visible even with enhanced imaging. Human doctrine assumes limited or no illumination. We train extensively in these conditions, not because we see perfectly, but because we've developed techniques that maximize minimal sensory input. Watch. She highlighted a 4-person team navigating a narrow section. They moved in extremely tight formation, almost touching, one hand occasionally reaching out to tap a teammate's shoulder. Their weapon movements were minimal, controlled, their heads constantly swiveling to expand their collective field of awareness. This is called a ranger file formation. Each soldier maintains physical contact or near contact with those ahead and behind. This allows navigation with minimal verbal communication and creates a sensory network. The lead soldier focuses on terrain ahead, checking for obstacles. The second watches the right flank. The third watches left. The fourth covers the rear. 4 sets of eyes covering 360 degrees of awareness. We use similar formations, Ivan objected. You use them in standard visibility conditions. We train them until they become reflexive in darkness. There's a difference between knowing a technique and living it. Watch this section. The footage jumped forward to the climbing operation. Coalition forces established elaborate safety systems, anchors, belays, light towers to illuminate the cliff face. Human teams simply climb. Your safety protocols are excellent, Mira said. They prioritize caution, which is correct, but they assume that safety requires illumination and mechanical assistance. Human climbers train extensively without bow. We develop tactile sensitivity, learn to read rock texture by feel, build muscle memory for different climbing techniques. A trained climber doesn't need to see every handhold clearly. They feel for stability, weight load, fracture points. Ralkix found himself leaning forward, fascinated despite his earlier skepticism. Korskinen wasn't boasting or dismissing coalition capabilities. She was teaching, breaking down seemingly impossible performance into comprehensible components. Can you teach non-humans these techniques? Nolith asked. The Torvain officer's skepticism had softened to cautious interest. Some techniques, fully. Others, with modification. Still others will adapt using technology that augments your natural capabilities rather than replacing them. Mira pulled up new images, equipment schematics, training protocols, technological specifications. For instance, most coalition species perceive visual spectrum differently from humans. But you all have functioning eyes. We can provide passive night vision optics tuned to your specific photoreceptor ranges. Not perfect, but substantially better than current systems. Passive systems exist, Vexic noted. They're expensive, bulky, require extensive power supplies. Human passive systems are compact and require minimal power because we've been miniaturizing this technology for 2 centuries. We'll share the designs. Similarly, we've developed auditory enhancement systems that work synergistically with Krallick's echolocation, tactile feedback systems that improve Torvan's spatial awareness in low light, chemical sensor arrays that leverage ergoth olfactory capabilities. She pulled up a training schedule that made Ralk's spine ridges flatten in dismay. 6 cycles of intensive preparation, night navigation, close quarters maneuvering, low-light marksmanship, psychological adaptation exercises. This isn't about making coalition forces fight like humans, Mira emphasized. It's about developing doctrine that accepts night operations as viable rather than suicidal. Will you ever match human performance in total darkness? Probably not. But you don't need to. You need to reach the threshold where night operations become tactically sound instead of guaranteed disasters. The room had transformed. Officers who'd entered projecting defeat now leaned forward, asking technical questions, requesting clarification on specific techniques. Ralk watched the shift with something approaching awe. Humans hadn't just demonstrated superiority, they'd offered to eliminate it by sharing every advantage. Admiral Thruck rose, his massive form somehow conveying humility. Colonel Koskinen, I owe you an apology. I assumed your confidence was arrogance. Instead, you've offered us a path forward when we saw only impossibility. No apology necessary, Admiral. Skepticism is healthy, but we're facing an enemy that won't accommodate our biological limitations. The contested reach operation happens whether we're ready or not. I'm simply ensuring we're ready. And if this training succeeds, Vexic asked. If we develop viable night combat doctrine. Mira's smile returned, that predator's expression that had unsettled Ralk during the first briefing. Then we don't just survive the night operation, Commander. We own it. Because while our enemies expect us to stumble through darkness, we'll be moving through our natural element. They've chosen the battlefield thinking it favors them. We'll prove they made a fatal mistake. 6 cycles blurred past in a haze of exhausted training. Sergeant Ralk had thought himself physically fit, professionally competent, mentally prepared for any challenge. The human training regime disabused him of those notions with brutal efficiency. Night 1. Navigation exercises. Simple concept, march 10 kilometers through broken terrain in darkness. Rolk activated his newly issued passive optics, the compact human-designed system that somehow weighed less than half his old equipment while providing superior clarity. The world resolved into grayscale detail, usable but unsettling. Everything looked alien, shadows became solid, solid objects seemed to phase in and out of perception. His human instructor, Staff Sergeant Imani Ogun, watched with patient amusement as Rolk stumbled over his third rock in as many minutes. "Your eyes are fighting the optics," Ogun explained. "You're trying to see normally while the system feeds you enhanced data. Stop fighting. Trust the tech." "Easy to say," Rock muttered, rubbing his shin where the latest collision had struck. "Sure is. Easy to do, too. Once you accept that your brain is plastic, it'll adapt. Give it time." By night 3, Rolk stopped questioning the optics. His brain had indeed adapted, integrating the enhanced vision into his normal sensory suite. He began moving faster, more confidently. Around him, other coalition soldiers experienced similar breakthroughs. Kellis stopped clicking her mandibles nervously. Yuvin quit treating darkness like an enemy to be conquered and started treating it like terrain to be navigated. Night 4. Combat drills. Live fire exercises, modified ammunition, strict safety protocols, but real marksmanship under conditions that made targeting difficult. Rolk learned to track targets by movement rather than clear identification, learned to trust his peripheral vision, to shoot at sound when sight failed, to work with his team to establish overlapping fields of fire that covered areas no single soldier could monitor effectively. His accuracy dropped 30% compared to daylight performance. But 30% of competent was still functional, and functional beat cowering in terror while enemies flanked your illuminated position. Night 5. The humans introduced psychological conditioning. Lieutenant Voss, the officer who'd led the demonstration platoon, walked them through meditation techniques that seemed laughably simple. Breath control, mental centering, accepting rather than fighting the darkness. Humans feared the night once, Voss told them. Before fire, before weapons, we were prey as much as predator. Darkness meant death. We overcame that fear through familiarity. You don't eliminate fear, you acknowledge it, then act despite it. Rolk found the mental exercises more difficult than physical training. His instincts screamed danger every time lights went off. Every shadow potentially hid threats. But gradually, incrementally, the primal terror faded to manageable alertness. By night 6, something remarkable had happened. The Coalition Training Company moved through darkness with coordination that would have seemed impossible 6 cycles earlier. Not human-level performance, but competent, professional, tactically viable. Commander Vexic observed the final exercise personally, standing beside Colonel Koskinen as 200 Coalition soldiers executed a night assault against fortified positions. Their movements still lacked the supernatural fluidity of human forces, but the improvement was undeniable. Casualty projections that had shown 43% now calculated 18%, still significant, but within acceptable operational parameters. "You've performed a miracle," Vexic said quietly. "No miracle," Mira replied. "Just systematic training and honest assessment of capabilities. Your soldiers are professionals. They simply needed the tools and techniques to operate in an environment their evolution didn't prepare them for. And the contested reach operation, still dangerous, still costly, but survivable and strategically sound." Vexic watched Sergeant Rolk lead his squad through a flawless flanking maneuver, the Torvine moving with confidence that would have been unthinkable 7 cycles ago. "You've changed the war's calculus, Colonel. Not just this operation, but the entire strategic picture. Night operations were always the enemy's advantage. You've neutralized it. With respect, Commander, we haven't neutralized anything. We've adapted. The enemy still holds superior numbers, better terrain knowledge, and prepared defenses. This training gives us a fighting chance, not guaranteed victory. But a chance is all we needed." The contested reach lived up to its name. 20 kilometers of vertical terrain, sensor-baffling mineral deposits, and enemy forces dug into positions they'd prepared for months. 3 previous assaults had failed with catastrophic casualties. High Command had designated it a strategic linchpin, control the reach, control the entire sector's supply lines. Captain Ralk, battlefield promoted during training, crouched at the operations staging area as dusk faded to darkness. Around him, 2,000 Coalition soldiers prepared for the largest night operation in recorded Coalition history. Not just the trained company, but fresh units who'd absorbed the new doctrine through accelerated preparation, untested, unproven, but at least no longer helpless. The human contingent numbered 500, a full battalion, including armor support and artillery observers. They'd integrated seamlessly into Coalition command structure, human officers advising at every level rather than operating independently. Colonel Koskinen appeared beside Ralk's position, her approach as soundless as ever. Nervous, Captain? Terrified, Colonel. But functional. Good. Fear keeps you sharp, overconfidence kills. She studied the terrain ahead, her expression thoughtful. Your company will take the left approach, following Human Charlie team. They'll break trail, handle initial resistance. Your job is exploitation. When they create an opening, you push through hard and fast. Understood? Understood, ma'am. But Colonel, why humans first? We've trained for this. We're ready. You're ready, Mira agreed. But humans have been doing this for millennia. We put our most experienced soldiers on point because this isn't about pride or proving equality. It's about winning. Use every advantage, exploit every capability, and bring your people home alive. Ralk's throat sac inflated with emotions he couldn't quite name. Gratitude, certainly. Respect. Perhaps something like friendship. We won't let you down, I know, because you're professionals. And professionals do the job. She checked her chronometer. 2 minutes. Good hunting, Captain. She vanished into the darkness, leaving Ralk to gather his squad. Chorus materialized at his side, her mandibles quiet now, her posture radiating confidence. First Lieutenant Quest reporting, Captain. 3rd Squad ready for operations? 4th Squad ready. Trooper Hell added, the young Urgoth's voice steady despite this being his first combat operation. One by one, his officers reported readiness. 40 soldiers, 8 different species, unified by training and purpose. 6 cycles ago, they'd have been walking casualties. Now they were warriors who owned the night. All units. This is command, Vexic's voice carried across the comm network. Operation Nightfall is go. Human forces advance now. Coalition forces advance now. Coalition forces follow on their signal. Remember your training. Trust your equipment. Watch your sectors. We own the dark tonight. Ahead, 500 humans moved into the canyon complex without fanfare or dramatic gestures. They simply faded into shadow like smoke dissipating. Ralk's enhanced optics tracked their thermal signatures briefly before terrain masked even that. Gone. Invisible. Deadly. 3 minutes later, the first explosions lit the night. Human special forces striking enemy sensor arrays, artillery positions, command nodes, not blind firing into darkness, precision strikes against targets mapped during earlier reconnaissance. The enemy had prepared for conventional assault, had positioned for defending against illuminated forces pushing through predictable approaches. They hadn't prepared for ghosts. Charlie led to Coalition forces, primary obstacles neutralized, advanced to phase line Alpha and exploit. Ralk rose, his squad rising with him. 1st Company, advance. They moved into darkness that no longer felt quite so dark. The optics revealed terrain in manageable detail. The training kicked in, Ranger file formation, overlapping sectors, constant communication through hand signals and minimal verbal confirmation. 1 kilometer. 2. No contact. Then enemy forces opened fire. Muzzle flashes brilliant in the darkness, tracers arcing through the canyon. Coalition forces dove for cover, returning fire with measured discipline. Ralk's tactical display showed the engagement developing, enemies firing from prepared positions, concentrating on the obvious approach where they expected Coalition forces. But Coalition forces weren't where expected. The trained company had split, flanking wide on routes human scouts designated as viable. When Ralk's squad opened fire from the enemy's left flank, the prepared positions became death traps. Defenders turned to face the new threat, exposing themselves to human sniper teams positioned on overlooking ridges, The engagement lasted 7 minutes. Enemy casualties, 93%. Coalition casualties, 11 wounded, 0 killed. Charlie led to all forces, continue advance. They're breaking, and they were. Enemy forces retreated from positions they'd held for months, abandoning fortifications, falling back in disorder, because darkness, their reliable ally, their tactical advantage, had become their enemy. Coalition forces moved through the night with coordination that shattered enemy assumptions about their capabilities. By dawn, coalition forces controlled every strategic position in the contested reach. The enemy had retreated 15 kilometers, abandoning supply caches, communication equipment, wounded soldiers who couldn't keep pace. Not a rout, but close enough. Rock stood on the ridge overlooking the primary valley as solar light broke across the horizon. His company had taken 0 fatalities, 11 wounded, all minor, already receiving treatment. Mission accomplished with casualty rates 60% below projections. Colonel Koskinen climbed the ridge to stand beside him. Her armor scorched from near misses, her face showing the exhaustion of combat adrenaline fading. Your company performed exceptionally, Captain. I'll ensure that gets noted in official reports. We had excellent teachers, Colonel. You had the will to learn. That matters more than teaching. She gazed across the battlefield, where coalition forces were establishing defensive positions and processing captured equipment. Command expected casualties when they approved this operation. Thousands of casualties, with questionable strategic gain. Instead, we took a linchpin position with minimal losses and broke enemy morale across the sector. War is never clean, never without cost. But tonight proved that humans don't have a monopoly on night operations. We just had experience you lacked. Now we're all night fighters, Ralk finished. Now you're all survivors who learned to adapt. Evolution gave humans advantages in darkness. Yes, but evolution also gave you intelligence, professionalism, and the capacity to master your fears. Those traits matter more than biology. Always have. Across the valley, Urgoth engineers were already establishing supply lines. Torvan scouts were mapping enemy retreat routes. Krolix signal specialists were intercepting enemy communications to assess their disarray. Coalition forces working together, operating in conditions that would have been suicide 6 cycles ago. Command had expected casualties. Humans asked for night training. In that difference lay everything. Rauk activated his comm, connecting to his scattered company. All squads. Excellent work. Established defensive positions and rest. We earned it. Kish's voice came back, tired but triumphant. 3rd squad copies. Captain, permission to say something unprofessional? Granted. Darkness isn't so bad once you get used to it. Rauk laughed, the sound carrying across the ridge. No, Lieutenant, it really isn't. Beside him, Colonel Koskinen smiled, that predator's smile. The expression that had puzzled him during their first meeting. Now he understood it. Not arrogance or condescension. Just recognition that sometimes the monster in the dark turns out to be you, and that realization changes everything. The war would continue. Other operations awaited. But tonight, in the contested reaches, broken canyons, and vertical cliffs, 2,000 coalition soldiers had learned what humans had known for millennia. That darkness is just another battlefield. That fear is just another obstacle, and that adaptation beats biology every single time. Command had expected casualties. They got victory instead, and that made all the difference.